Gambia's asset scandal, Unmasked, Barrow promises justice over Jammeh's looted wealth. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where we go beyond the headlines to uncover the truth behind Africa's most pressing political stories. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. In today's video, we journey to the Gambia, where President Adama Barrow is under fire over revelations about the controversial sale of Yahya Jammeh's seized assets. Was justice served, or has the people's trust been betrayed? Stay with us as we unpack this developing story, compare it with cases across Africa, and explore what this moment means for the future of democracy in West Africa. In a rare and emotionally charged national address delivered on May 14, 2025, President Adama Barrow of the Gambia sought to contain mounting public outrage and reinvigorate confidence in his administration's integrity. The controversy stems from recent revelations about the disposal of assets seized from former President Yahya Jammeh and his close allies, assets whose very symbolism embodies Gambia's post-authoritarian transition. Barrow's promise of transparency, accountability, and reform has brought fresh momentum to a lingering national grievance over the opaque handling of Jammeh's ill-gotten gains. This unfolding episode lays bare the enduring complexities of transitional justice, not just for Gambia, but for many African nations grappling with post-dictatorial accountability. The situation poses critical questions. Who benefits from asset recovery? How transparent are these processes? What institutional safeguards exist to protect public interest in post-regime transitions? From commission to controversy, a timeline of Gambia's asset saga. Following Yahya Jammeh's dramatic departure in 2017, the Gambia initiated a sweeping overhaul of its governance, legal, and institutional frameworks. The Janneh Commission, established by President Barrow in July 2017 and concluding in March 2019, was tasked with investigating Jammeh-era financial mismanagement. Its final report exposed a trail of corruption, including unauthorized withdrawals from public accounts, state asset misappropriation, and abuse of office, findings that formed the basis for a government white paper, Government of the Gambia 2019. The white paper explicitly called for asset recovery and criminal prosecution in cases of proven abuse. Following this, a ministerial task force was formed in May 2019 to oversee the disposal of assets, a move President Barrow said was based on the Justice Ministry's recommendation. However, the current storm was triggered by disclosures that several assets, ranging from livestock and vehicles to tractors, were sold off during the active proceedings of the Commission, raising legitimate concerns about due process, oversight, and transparency. Critical analysis: Barrow's administration on a test of legitimacy. President Barrow's admission that he learned of certain sales for the first time is both damning and revealing. It signals potential lapses in intragovernmental communication, ministerial overreach, or worse, deliberate circumvention of executive oversight. Such revelations erode public trust, particularly in a transitional justice landscape where confidence in institutions is still fragile. Barrow's swift response, an emergency cabinet meeting, and pledges of full cooperation with ongoing National Assembly and National Audit Office investigations was likely aimed at containing political damage. Yet the timing and tone of his address suggest reactive leadership rather than proactive governance. This reactive posture underscores a broader concern. Transitional justice, when delayed or selectively enforced, risks morphing into political theater instead of institutional reform. Africa-wide context, a mirror to the continent. Gambia is not alone in its struggle to manage post-dictatorship asset recovery. Across Africa, similar patterns emerge. Nigeria, post-Abacha era, witnessed a convoluted asset recovery process involving Swiss bank accounts, multiple governments, and allegations of relooting recovered funds. Transparency International criticized the process for lacking clear disbursement frameworks. Transparency International 2018. Angola's government under João Lourenço moved to reclaim assets stolen under former President José Eduardo dos Santos, targeting the dos Santos family, but faced criticism over selective justice and opaque trials. Human Rights Watch 2021. Zimbabwe's efforts after Robert Mugabe's exit have been equally sluggish, with little public knowledge about any significant recovery of wealth amassed by the former First Family, despite promises by Emerson Mnangagwa. These examples reflect the systemic weaknesses in many African states: limited institutional independence, poor asset tracking systems, and the politicization of anti-corruption efforts. Gambia's case now stands as both a warning and a case study in how not to derail public confidence after a regime change. The role of civil society and legislative activism. The emergence of civil society coalitions like Gambians Against Looted Assets, GALA, has been instrumental in keeping this issue alive. Their persistent advocacy, including street protests and media engagement, has forced the Barrow administration to respond. Furthermore, the National Assembly's decision to establish a special select committee to probe asset sales shows the growing role of legislative activism in democratic consolidation. According to The Point, May 15, 2025, lawmakers are demanding detailed records of all transactions conducted since the Janneh Commission's inception, including buyer identities, sale prices, and the eventual use of proceeds. This marks a significant departure from earlier years when parliamentary oversight was largely symbolic. Forward-looking, recommendations and future risks. To rebuild trust and avoid further political fallout, the Barrow administration must undertake several actions. 1. Immediate public disclosure. Publish a full inventory of seized assets, their estimated value, sales proceeds, and usage. This transparency will deter speculation and calm public anxiety. 2. Independent investigation. While Barrow deferred to existing institutions, a genuinely independent panel, preferably with international observers, could reinforce legitimacy and reassure civil society. 3. Institutional reforms. Create an autonomous asset recovery and disposal authority with legislative backing, financial audit mechanisms, and citizen oversight. 4. Legislative anchoring. Draft and pass an Asset Recovery Act to codify procedures, timelines, and penalties, preventing future loopholes and ministerial overreach. 5. Civic engagement platforms. Establish digital platforms where citizens can track asset recovery efforts in real time, a move successfully piloted in Kenya during the Kibaki era. Failure to act decisively could erode Gambia's democratic gains and embolden anti-reform elements. As regional leaders observe Gambia's unfolding story, it also becomes a litmus test for ECOWAS's commitment to governance standards, especially in light of recent democratic backsliding across West Africa. Judicial accountability, Barrow's political future, and the struggle for legitimacy in transitional governance. As the Gambia navigates the fallout of questionable asset sales linked to the Jammeh era, all eyes now turn to the judiciary and financial oversight institutions, pillars of governance that are indispensable for rebuilding credibility. President Barrow's commitment to respecting constitutional bodies, such as the National Audit Office and National Assembly, was a notable shift from executive overreach common in many transitional regimes. However, for this pledge to translate into meaningful reform, these institutions must move beyond symbolism and into assertive enforcement. Strengthening judicial and audit mechanisms. a path to restoring public trust. The National Audit Office, NAO, and courts must not only be empowered, but also insulated from political interference. Historically, transitional governments across Africa have often sidelined judicial institutions when political interests are at stake. In Liberia, the George Weah administration faced backlash for failing to prosecute high-profile corruption cases revealed by its own General Auditing Commission and Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission, LACC. The lesson is clear. Independence without enforcement is meaningless. To avoid a similar fate, the Gambia's judiciary must 1. Establish special asset recovery chambers, with trained judges and prosecutors skilled in financial crimes, money laundering, and asset tracing. 2. Enforce real-time court oversight. All asset disposal actions should be authorized and monitored by courts to prevent retroactive justifications of illegal sales. 3. Mandate time-bound proceedings. Delayed justice breeds impunity. Courts must set strict deadlines for the investigations currently underway into the asset sales. On its part, the National Audit Office must collaborate with the Public Accounts Committee to conduct forensic audits, not just financial reviews. This distinction is crucial in identifying patterns of collusion, undervaluation, or asset misappropriation. Barrow's Political Balancing Act, a narrow path between reform and resistance with presidential elections scheduled for 2026, President Barrow faces an increasingly delicate balancing act. His political capital is closely tied to his administration's ability to fulfill the promises of post-Jammeh renewal. However, cracks are emerging. Youth-led protests, civil society mobilization, and growing dissatisfaction within the legislature are warning signs of waning public patience. The resurgence of Yahya Jammeh loyalists, some now repositioned in opposition parties, adds a layer of complexity. If Barrow is perceived as weak on justice, he risks emboldening retrogressive political elements. If he pushes too hard against entrenched interests within his own party or government, he may face internal fragmentation. Thus, Barrow's future political survival depends on strategic, bold action, such as fulfilling the TRRC recommendations. The Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, TRRC, produced a landmark report in 2021. Delayed implementation has become a point of contention among victims groups and donors alike. Empowering the Anti-Corruption Commission, a robust and well-resourced anti-corruption body, could serve as an independent check on both legacy and current malfeasance. Forming multi-stakeholder oversight councils composed of civil society, academia, faith leaders, and the private sector, such councils could vet and review key government actions in asset disposal, procurement, and transitional justice. Regional implications, ECOWAS, democracy, and the struggle against impunity. The Gambia's current crisis holds deep significance for the economic community of West African states, ECOWAS, a regional bloc already struggling with member states sliding into authoritarianism, constitutional manipulation, and military coups. In the last 5 years alone, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have fallen under military control, suspending constitutions and delaying transitions. Senegal, once hailed for democratic stability, faced pre-election unrest and concerns over third-term ambitions until President Macky Sall stepped down under pressure. Guinea's transition under Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya remains contentious, with uncertainty over timelines for civilian rule and justice for Alpha Conde's excesses. Against this backdrop, Gambia remains one of the few post-authoritarian democracies still holding the line. Its ability to transparently resolve the asset sale controversy could serve as a model or a cautionary tale. ECOWAS and the African Union, AU, which have both previously applauded the Gambia's democratic transition, must now go beyond rhetoric. They should provide technical assistance, legal, forensic, and administrative support to aid the audit and investigations. Peer review monitoring through the African Peer Review Mechanism, APRM, to ensure that the Gambia's governance reforms align with continental benchmarks. Donor conditionality frameworks. International partners should tie aid and development financing to measurable progress in asset recovery, anti-corruption, and justice reform. International dimension. Where is the money? One overlooked but critical question remains. Where are the proceeds from the asset sales? The Barrow administration must disclose the bank accounts, ministries, or programs where funds from sold assets were deposited. In Nigeria, a similar challenge led to repeated controversies over the usage of funds repatriated from Switzerland in the Abacha case. Delayed disclosure or vague accounting practices only reinforce public suspicion and international donor fatigue. The World Bank's Stolen Asset Recovery (STAR) initiative offers tools for tracking and verifying such assets. Gambia could leverage international cooperation agreements to ensure transparency, especially in cases where Jammeh's wealth was siphoned abroad. Citizen, oversight, media advocacy, and lessons from global transitions. As the Barrow administration confronts the backlash over the Jammeh-era asset sales, the role of citizen engagement, free media, and digital governance tools becomes increasingly central. In countries emerging from long-standing authoritarian rule, institutional reforms alone are insufficient to guarantee accountability. True democratic resilience is rooted in the active participation of the people and the empowerment of watchdog entities to hold power to account. Citizen participation, from protest to policy influence. The mobilization of groups such as Gambians Against Looted Assets, GALA, demonstrates the power of organized civic action. Their demands, public disclosure of asset sales, independent audits, and accountability for those implicated, have helped transform a bureaucratic controversy into a nationwide governance reckoning. But GALA and similar groups need more than symbolic attention. They require institutional access and legal guarantees. A few actionable avenues to institutionalize citizen oversight include 1. Public asset registry platforms. The creation of a searchable online database listing all assets seized, recovered, sold, or in litigation, updated in real time, would empower citizens to track state actions and flag anomalies. Rwanda's Office of the Ombudsman runs a similar platform, which has significantly improved public trust. 2. Civic education campaigns. Civil society organizations should collaborate with the Ministry of Information and Education to launch national campaigns explaining asset recovery processes and citizens' roles in governance. The aim is to demystify technical terms like forfeiture, commission sales, and government white paper, making accountability accessible to everyday Gambians. 3. Community-based accountability forums. Inspired by Kenya's public barazas, community meetings, local governments can organize quarterly public hearings where ministries report progress on asset recoveries and respond to citizen questions. Media and digital activism. The Fourth Estate under pressure and promise. The Gambian media, though relatively young in its democratic rebirth, has demonstrated commendable courage. Outlets like The Standard, Kerfatu, and The Point have continued to cover the asset sale scandal, often under pressure from political actors. Yet, the media remains constrained by inadequate funding, limited investigative capacity, and threats of libel suits. To strengthen media's role in sustaining transparency, investigative journalism fellowships. Local and international donors should fund long-form investigations into corruption and transitional justice. These fellowships would support fact-checking, data journalism training, and cross-border collaboration. Whistleblower protection mechanisms. Without legal and financial safety for insiders willing to speak out, critical information about asset mismanagement will remain buried. Gambia must pass a comprehensive Whistleblower Protection Act aligned with African Union standards. Partnerships with tech startups. Local innovators can build apps or SMS-based systems to allow anonymous tips on asset misappropriation. In Uganda, the U-Report platform enables citizens to report local government abuses directly to the central monitoring dashboard. Lessons from global post-authoritarian transitions. The Gambia's current turmoil over asset recovery and transitional justice echo similar historical paths in other regions of the world. Comparative case studies reveal patterns of success and pitfalls. South Africa, reconciliation over retribution. After the fall of apartheid, South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, emphasized healing over punishment. However, this choice came at the cost of limited economic restitution or asset recovery. The Gambia's TRRC has taken a more hybrid approach, acknowledging victims while calling for restitution and prosecution. The lesson: reconciliation and justice must go hand in hand. Chile, judicial independence as a shield post-Pinochet. Chile used the judiciary as a key safeguard. High-level military and political figures were prosecuted years after democratic transition thanks to the autonomy of the courts. Gambia must strengthen its judiciary similarly if it is to prosecute powerful figures involved in Jammeh-era corruption or their protectors within the current administration. Tunisia, digital transparency tools. Tunisia's OpenGov initiatives post-Arab Spring made budgetary and procurement data accessible online, while political instability later hampered reforms. The digital transparency culture improved citizen awareness and reduced elite capture. Gambia can replicate these tools through partnerships with African civic tech innovators. An emerging crossroads, democratic backsliding, or reform renaissance. The current asset sale scandal is more than a political misstep. It is a litmus test for the soul of the Gambia's democracy. Will the Barrow administration rise to the occasion by embracing full transparency and institutional reform? Or will it revert to the opaque habits of the past, shielding political allies and prioritizing damage control over truth? More broadly, Gambia's choices will echo across Africa, particularly among states teetering between reform and regression. The African Union's Agenda 2063, which envisions a continent built on good governance, democracy, and respect for human rights, depends on model states like the Gambia to lead by example. If the Gambia falters, it risks signaling that accountability can be postponed indefinitely without consequence. Economic implications, donor confidence, and the rising tide of youth and diaspora activism. As the Gambia grapples with the controversy surrounding the Jammeh-era asset disposals, one of the most underexplored yet consequential dimensions is the economic cost of mismanaged asset recovery. The focus has largely remained on the legal and political fallout, but the financial implications, particularly in a fragile economy like the Gambia's, are deeply significant and far-reaching. Economic implications of mismanaged asset recovery. According to the Janneh Commission report, Yahya Jammeh and his associates siphoned off nearly $1.5 billion, approximately $30 million USD, from public coffers through various schemes, ranging from unauthorized state account withdrawals to the illegal acquisition of public lands and commercial enterprises. If properly recovered and reinvested, these funds could have addressed critical development gaps in healthcare, education, and agricultural revitalization. However, the lack of clarity over the proceeds from asset sales risks significant economic consequences. 1. Revenue loss. Undervalued or unauthorized sales represent not only a betrayal of justice, but a direct loss to the national treasury. If vehicles, livestock, and agricultural equipment were sold at below market value or without formal accounting, the nation effectively subsidized the enrichment of private individuals. 2. Distorted budgetary planning. Development budgets are partly built on anticipated asset recovery revenues. Unclear flows and missing funds undermine fiscal credibility and limit the government's ability to plan or meet debt and infrastructure obligations. 3. Discouragement of future recovery. International financial institutions and asset tracing partners may withdraw support if the Gambia cannot guarantee transparent and traceable processes. This would cripple efforts to recover assets still hidden in foreign accounts or under shell companies. To correct these distortions, the Barrow government must undertake a comprehensive financial reconciliation exercise, disclosing all accounts where funds were deposited, identifying any mismatches, and publishing an external audit report accessible to the public and Parliament. Donor confidence and international support at risk. The success of transitional reforms in the Gambia has been significantly buoyed by the goodwill and financial support of multilateral and bilateral donors. The European Union, for instance, pledged over $140 million in development aid from 2017 to 2023, while institutions like the World Bank and the IMF have supported public finance management, anti-corruption efforts, and civil service reforms. However, mismanagement of high-profile issues like asset recovery could endanger that trust. Recent reports from donor consortiums suggest growing frustration with implementation delays, accountability loopholes, and politicization of reform priorities. The risk is twofold: conditionality, hardening. Donors may begin to attach stricter performance benchmarks to future aid disbursements, limiting the government's fiscal space and autonomy. Funding reallocation. International agencies may redirect funds to NGOs and civil society partners rather than government channels, weakening state-led development programs. For continued credibility, the Barrow administration must act swiftly to update development partners on the asset sale inquiries, invite donor observers to the National Assembly probe, and incorporate external audit recommendations into governance reforms. Youth unrest and diaspora pressure. The democratic fatigue risk. Gambia's population is overwhelmingly youthful. Over 60% are under the age of 25, and increasingly vocal. Many in this demographic, having placed hope in the new Gambia following the fall of Jammeh, now express growing frustration over unfulfilled reforms. Social media platforms like Twitter, X, TikTok, and Facebook are abuzz with hashtags such as "Where is the money?", "Our account for the assets," and "New Gambia or Old Tricks," reflecting a mood of cynicism and betrayal. More concerning is the risk of democratic fatigue, a condition where citizens, particularly youth, lose faith in democratic processes due to repeated cycles of corruption, broken promises, and elite impunity. In some parts of West Africa, such disenchantment has paved the way for populist or military alternatives, as seen in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea. Similarly, the Gambian diaspora, many of whom mobilized politically to support Barrow's rise and later the TRRC process, are becoming increasingly critical. Diaspora organizations in the UK, US, and Sweden have called for international investigations into the asset disposal and freeze orders on any proceeds found to be diverted abroad. They argue that just as Gambians abroad lobbied for international sanctions against Jammeh's regime, they can do the same if accountability stalls under Barrow's leadership. A forward-looking strategy must include youth inclusion frameworks, establish youth advisory councils within the office of the president and key ministries, provide policy-making space to young Gambians beyond token representation, diaspora policy forums, convene biannual diaspora government roundtables to share concerns, solicit solutions, and report on governance reform milestones. Digital civic engagement platforms gamify participation in governance by introducing platforms that allow youth to vote on development priorities, track reform promises, and rate ministries on transparency. A roadmap for sustainable asset recovery, accountability reform, and President Barrow's defining legacy. As the Gambia stands at a decisive crossroads, the ongoing scandal surrounding the disposal of Yahya Jammeh era assets has become more than a governance issue. It has emerged as the litmus test for President Adama Barrow's political integrity and democratic legacy. To regain public trust, restore donor confidence, and position Gambia as a regional model for post-authoritarian reform, a structured and sustainable roadmap is not optional. It is imperative. Towards a national asset recovery framework, step-by-step roadmap. 1. Comprehensive asset mapping and revaluation. The government must urgently initiate a fresh audit and valuation of all assets seized from Jammeh and his associates, including land titles, companies, farms, vehicles, livestock, and foreign-based properties. This should include geotagged inventories for physical assets, verification of ownership status, real-time digital publication through an online portal. Countries like Kenya and South Africa have pioneered asset maps that are publicly accessible and frequently updated. The Gambia could adopt similar models, enabling citizen verification and whistleblower submissions. 2. Formation of a National Asset Recovery and Reinvestment Commission, NAREC. This independent body should be mandated by an act of parliament to investigate and oversee all current and future asset recovery efforts, manage public communications and provide quarterly updates, collaborate with the judiciary, civil society, and international partners, recommend reinvestment strategies for recovered funds, especially in priority sectors like education, health, and rural development. For legitimacy, NAREC's leadership should include civil society, legal experts, financial auditors, youth representatives, and diaspora observers. 3. Legislative and regulatory overhaul. A new asset recovery and public accountability law must be enacted to codify legal definitions of public asset forfeiture and disposal penalties for unauthorized sales, undervaluation, or concealment, clear processes for restitution to victims and reinvestment into development projects, public oversight mechanisms for all recovered funds. This law should be aligned with international instruments such as the UN Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, and the AU Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption. 4. Judicial fast-track units. Specialized divisions within the courts must be set up to handle cases of asset mismanagement, diversion, or abuse of office, expedite hearings related to Jammeh-era asset claims and third-party ownership disputes, coordinate with foreign jurisdictions on asset repatriation and mutual legal assistance, comparative leadership perspectives, Barrow in the transitional mirror. President Barrow's current test bears a striking resemblance to key moments faced by other African leaders navigating post-dictatorship transitions. Nelson Mandela chose reconciliation but left institutional reform incomplete, which critics argue paved the way for state capture years later. Laurent Gbagbo's failure to reform Côte d'Ivoire's institutions after the Civil War led to political polarization and relapse into conflict. Jerry Rawlings in Ghana embraced a radical approach, public executions of corrupt former leaders, but later institutionalized economic reforms and handed over power democratically, securing a legacy of relative stability. Barrow's path remains open. If he anchors his legacy on transparency, truth, and institutional reform, he could transform the Gambia into one of Africa's few successful models of peaceful, democratic, post-authoritarian transitions. But should he falter, history may judge him as a transitional figure who failed to transition. The stakes for Barrow's legacy and Gambia's future. What makes this moment pivotal is not just the controversy, but the opportunity it presents. For a country that emerged from the trauma of dictatorship, every decision made now either reinforces or reverses the foundational gains of 2017. What's at stake includes the legitimacy of transitional justice institutions like the TRRC and Janneh Commission donor trust and international credibility, youth political participation, and faith in democratic accountability, national cohesion, particularly as remnants of the old regime reposition politically. If Barrow follows through with bold, principled leadership, the Gambia could inspire countries like Chad, Guinea, and even Tunisia, where post-authoritarian reforms have stagnated. If not, the country risks joining the growing list of African states where democratic transitions were reversed before they were completed. Survivors' voices, reparations models, and human-centered transitional justice in the Gambia. As investigations into the Jammeh era asset sales unfold, the most overlooked but essential dimension of transitional justice now resurfaces: the lived experiences of victims. Behind every misappropriated dalasi, seized plot of land, or illegally acquired business, there are real people whose livelihoods were stolen, futures derailed, and families broken. Addressing this aspect is not merely about financial recovery, it is about justice, healing, and dignity. Survivor testimonies: personal loss in a political economy of theft. The testimonies collected by the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission, TRRC, between 2019 and 2021 included chilling accounts from business owners, civil servants, farmers, and widows whose assets were forcefully taken by state operatives under Yahya Jammeh's command. Fatumata Jawo, a small-scale poultry farmer in Kanilai, lost her entire flock and farm equipment to soldiers who claimed the property in the name of the president. Despite a TRRC recommendation for restitution, she has received no compensation and lives in debt. Lamin Cisse, a former customs officer, testified that his family house was seized and converted into a military outpost. His children grew up in displacement, and he now rents a single room in Brikama. He has watched with dismay as officials trade formerly confiscated government assets behind closed doors. These stories are not anomalies. They are emblematic of a system in which state power became a tool for personal enrichment and public dispossession. If asset recovery fails to link recovered wealth to victim-centered restitution, it risks reinforcing the very injustice it was intended to correct. Reparations models: lessons from Africa and beyond. While financial limitations pose challenges for comprehensive reparations, various African and international examples offer workable blueprints. Morocco's Equity and Reconciliation Commission focused heavily on victim-centered reparations, including symbolic gestures like public apologies, medical assistance, and community rehabilitation. This model emphasized recognition of harm over material compensation alone. Sierra Leone's post-war reparations program, funded in part by recovered and donor-matched funds, it provided school fees, skills training, and health services to amputees, war widows, and orphans. Although underfunded, it remains a reference point for integrating reparations into broader development frameworks. Peru's Reparations Council developed a national registry of victims and used both financial and non-financial reparations, e.g., access to housing, education, and community infrastructure. It demonstrated that a strategic mix of local and international partnerships can sustain long-term restitution. The Gambia can adopt a phased, hybrid model. 1. Victim Verification Registry. The TRRC database should be publicly accessible, with consent, to identify beneficiaries eligible for reparations tied to asset recovery. 2. Reparations, trust fund. Establish a national fund, partly financed through recovered assets and donor support, to disperse medical, housing, education, and business rehabilitation grants. 3. Symbolic justice initiatives include national apology days, memorial spaces for victims, and renaming of public institutions formerly misused by the dictatorship. 4. Community-based restitution. Recovered public lands, farms, or government properties should be repurposed into schools, health clinics, or women's centers in areas most affected by the Jammeh regime. Setting global best practices, the Gambia as a beacon of human-centered justice. The Gambia has the rare opportunity to build a people-first model of transitional justice that could influence global policy and regional frameworks. Most asset recovery regimes emphasize state restitution. However, emerging global consensus, reflected in the Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative, STAR, and the Global Forum on Asset Recovery, GFAR, increasingly supports redirecting recovered wealth to victims and public benefit. For this to happen, the Gambia must align national frameworks with international norms on victim restitution, e.g., UN Basic Principles and Guidelines on the Right to a Remedy and Reparation, 2005. Engage ECOWAS in designing a regional protocol on asset recovery with a victims first lens, which could be adopted by countries undergoing similar transitions. Publish annual reports detailing how recovered assets have been reinvested into victim services, local communities, and democratic institutions. Intersections of justice, security, and the future of democracy in West Africa. The Jammeh-era asset scandal has served as a national awakening in the Gambia, reviving public demand for justice, transparency, and accountability. But to secure lasting peace and democracy, transitional justice must go beyond commissions and recovery. It must reshape institutions, reform the security sector, and deliver tangible benefits to the people, especially youth, who are often the first to lose hope and the last to be heard. Transitional justice and security sector, reform, an unfinished agenda. One of the enduring legacies of authoritarian rule in the Gambia is the politicization of the security forces. Under Yahya Jammeh, segments of the military and police were used as instruments of oppression, arbitrary detention, and property seizure. Several of the same institutions were involved in or complicit with the illegal acquisition of assets now under scrutiny. Rebuilding these institutions requires more than new leadership. It demands structural reform. 1. Vetting and lustration processes. Identify and remove personnel involved in serious human rights violations and corrupt practices related to asset seizures or intimidation of victims. 2. Civic and human rights training. Integrate TRRC findings into police and military training curricula to instill democratic values, accountability, and a service-first mentality. 3. Public security oversight councils. Empower civilians, especially youth, women, and community leaders, to monitor the actions of local police and military units and report misconduct without fear of reprisal. By linking transitional justice with security sector reform, the Gambia can dismantle the infrastructure of impunity and rebuild public trust in state institutions, youth, employment, and democratic resilience. Without addressing economic disillusionment, transitional justice risks becoming performative. Youth in the Gambia, educated, unemployed, and politically aware, are watching how justice is served. If they see stolen wealth recycled among elites while their communities suffer, the appeal of radicalism or apathy may grow. Asset recovery should be reinvested into job-creating sectors such as agribusiness cooperatives on recovered farmlands, ICT, and entrepreneurship hubs, using proceeds from sold government properties, vocational training centers funded through the Reparations Trust Fund. Every Dalasi recovered from Jammeh's network is an opportunity to rebuild trust, deliver dignity, and empower a new generation of Gambians to safeguard their democracy. Geopolitical implications for West Africa. The Gambia struggle is not isolated. It echoes across West Africa, where coups, third-term amendments, and elite corruption have threatened democratic consolidation. Countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Niger are grappling with military rule. Senegal only recently avoided democratic derailment. Nigeria faces persistent impunity, while Liberia and Sierra Leone tread a delicate path toward justice and reform. In this fragile context, the Gambia's experience becomes a regional benchmark. If President Barrow succeeds in confronting asset corruption, implementing reparations, and revitalizing democratic institutions, it sends a clear message across the continent. Democracy is worth defending, even after dictatorship. Advice to African leaders, from crisis to legacy. To African leaders navigating transitions or governance crises, the lessons from the Gambia are sobering and instructive. 1. Transitional justice is not a checkbox. It is a foundation. It must be inclusive, transparent, and backed by genuine political will. 2. Assets recovered from corrupt regimes must serve the people, not perpetuate elite enrichment. Establish legal frameworks and independent oversight mechanisms. 3. Link justice to economic development. Use recovered wealth to fuel education, employment, and community reinvestment. 4. Protect civic space and media freedom. They are not enemies of the state but allies in nation building. 5. Think beyond your term. The true test of leadership is not re-election. It is the institutions you leave behind. Summary of key messages. The scandal over the Jammeh-era asset sales in the Gambia has revealed critical weaknesses in oversight, transparency, and institutional accountability. President Adama Barrow's pledge of full transparency, coupled with parliamentary and audit investigations, has opened a path for reform, but actions must match promises. Sustainable transitional justice requires integrating asset recovery with victim reparations, judicial reforms, and public trust restoration. A comprehensive roadmap for asset recovery should include independent commissions, new legislation, digital transparency tools, and reinvestment into public welfare. Lessons from Morocco, South Africa, Sierra Leone, and global best practices underscore the importance of survivor-centered justice and strategic reinvestment. The Gambia's success or failure will echo across West Africa, where democratic gains remain fragile and in need of positive regional models. As Africa stands at a crossroads between democratic renewal and authoritarian relapse, the Gambia's journey is a reminder that the true power of leadership lies not in control, but in accountability. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV. If the Gambia can get this right, it could shine as a model of people-centered justice in a region struggling to uphold democratic values. But if it fails, it risks becoming another cautionary tale of promises made but not kept. If you found value in today's analysis, please like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Together, we make the difference.